Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of Forbes Women. Geeta Patel is an Emmy-nominated producer and director. She has worked on and directed some of the most anticipated and most watched episodes of HBO's House of the Dragon, a Game of Thrones spinoff. Geeta is here today to tell us all about House of the Dragon and also her career and how she got to this very fun seat she sits in. Geeta, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to start at the beginning. I know the Game of Thrones and House of Dragon fans will want us to talk about the series finale and season finale, and we'll get to that. But you started your career as a writing assistant, and you ultimately didn't get your own agent until the age of 35. And I kind of love that trajectory, right? It just didn't happen for you immediately. Can you take us through those early days and how you got from point A to point where you are now?
Yeah, I'm the child of immigrants, and I was the first one born in America. My parents are from small farms in India. My father's village pooled their money to send him to America. And so when they got here, it wasn't in their mentality to be an artist because they didn't have that luxury. Where they came from, everybody just worked to survive. And I think that continued as they came to America. And when they raised my brother and me, it was about surviving and being able to make money one day and have a job like doctor, lawyer, what have you. And so I knew early on that I wanted to be a storyteller, but you never know at that age if you, even in high school, college, if this is something that is just like everyone else. I want to be a dancer, I want to be a singer, or you're just a hobby or something that's real. And it's hard to know if you really have talent. And so by the time I got to college, it was very clear that this wasn't going away, this itch. And I was studying in Berlin, I was studying history, and I went to see a movie at the Berlinale. And I didn't even know which film it was. I just stood in line, and it happened to be the English Patient world premiere. And after the film was over, that was, I would say, if I was going to give it a term, the defining moment for me, that was it. I knew in that moment that there was something about storytelling that I was never going to shake, and it scared me. And as everybody came out of the theater, I stayed, and the theater emptied out, and all the actors walked out, and Anthony Minghella came out, and he looked right at me because there I was. I mean, I was clearly wanting to say something to him, and he just nodded. And I remember little Max Minghella was there too. And I just couldn't say anything because I didn't know what I had to say. I just knew that was it. And so he walked out to the coat room, and I had a friend with me, and she said, "What is up with you?" and and so we walked out to the coat room. I'm getting my coat, and again, I can't get rid of this. I'm shaking, and he sees me in the coat room again, and he waits for me to say something, and I don't say anything because I truly don't know what's happening. And then the next day, I'm getting ready for school, and I call every hotel in Berlin looking for him. And I finally, somebody answers the phone. It's his wife, and she starts laughing. And she said, "You're the Indian girl from yesterday, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Anthony thought that you would call. Let me get him. He's in the shower." And he got on the phone, and he said, "Ah, it's you. Come to my hotel. Let's just talk for a little bit." And so the next day, I went to his hotel, and we sat down. And again, I never said what I wanted, what I needed. Not, I didn't know. And he just said, "You're the child of immigrants. I'm the child of immigrants." He said, "I want to tell you one thing. You're going to feel like you need to do things right away and do it the way everyone else is doing, but you don't have that path all the time." He said, "Take your time." He said, "I'm here with you. I will be with you. Take your time." And so he stayed with me till he passed away. And after that moment, I knew. And then it was a matter of, the respect I had for my parents, because my parents are amazing. And I knew what they had gone through to give me what I had, and to throw it away, to go try to become an artist. I knew from the outside what that was. And so I finished college, got a good job in New York in finance. And after about 2 years, my dad came up to me and he said, "I haven't seen you smile in 2 years. I know what you want to do with your life. Go to LA." And so I flew to LA within a couple weeks, I think. It's a little blurry. And at that point, I'd written probably 200, 250 letters to people I admired, just telling them I admired them. And then I had been flying to LA to meet them. So I had met David E. Kelley, Leslie Moonves. I mean, so many people. I'd written with Aaron Sorkin back and forth. It just kept going. And so at that point, I had all these people that knew who I was and how pathetic I was, probably. And I had told them that my parents were trying to arrange my marriage, and that it was just like a big hot mess. But what was great is when I got to LA, I had a job pretty much right away. Mimi Leader had gotten one of my letters. She gave it to her showrunner, and I became a writer's assistant for Carrie O'Salem on Mimi Leader's show. And when you want something that bad, it's kind of like I just went through IVF and did 8 rounds to have my son. Like, when you want it that bad, you don't complain. You are there. You are, every moment you're accepting and absorbing, and that's what it was. And so I did that for about 4 years. And we did a show. My boss then kept me on, and we did production rewrites. So that means you work on films and help them get to, they're already kind of greenlit, but you help them in the last weeks before they start production. And what was great about that is that I have a very independent mind. My background is in languages and human rights and history. And so it was nice to learn the rules of what makes something commercial and then start breaking them. Mm-hmm. So we did that for a few years. And then my boss just looked at me one day. He's a screenwriter. He said, Geeta, I can't promote you to writer. That's not how this works in this industry. Writer comes from writing. And I hadn't written anything because I'd given him everything I had. And let's be honest, at that point, I didn't think I had any talent. It was so much easier to hide behind him. That's me. My biggest enemy has been myself my entire career, just thinking that I can't do this impossible dream that's in my head, and then having this fight within myself, which I think many people have. And so I started writing a novel for some reason because I thought it was easier and nobody would judge as much. And so I moved in with my parents. I started writing this novel. The novel was terrible. And after a couple of years, I thought, well, if I do research on the novel, maybe it'll be better. And so I went to the war zone of Kashmir, which is the area between India and Pakistan, to research this novel because I had set it there because my background's in that kind of thing. So I went to the war zone. I got off the plane with a couple of friends I was working with, and we realized right away that there was this war happening in a vacuum, and no one actually understood what was happening. All the media, everything was completely whitewashed because the people that were stringers were from either side of the conflict. And I think you can probably relate to it now with things happening in the world. And so I decided to stay in the war zone and just document it, because I think at that point in your 20s, you're just following your bliss, trying to figure out, you just follow your feelings if you're lucky. And I was lucky. So we stayed in the war zone. We got funded by Sundance. We went to their labs, and that's where I learned to be a filmmaker. And I figured out, and I realized that I was directing, which I had never expected to do. I had never dreamt that high. And to me, directing is just a matriculation from writing. It's a completion of writing. You already see everything when you're writing, or when you're conceiving, and then you get to complete it. So that project took probably 8 years on and off because of us not having money. I was a secretary almost the entire time on the side to make ends meet, and went to 2 Sundance labs. And that's where I really learned all these skills. And, they give you mentors, you learn how to work with a team. And when I came out of that, I knew that I wanted to be making fiction films and fiction television. I also, on a side note, I wanted to start a family. I was getting old and I didn't know if I would ever meet anyone. So I thought, if I get into TV directing, I can actually do what I love and support myself. But that's not an easy thing to do. It's not like, that's like, I'll be a big filmmaker and support myself. Like, that's just not something that, it's just a dream.
But I think there's been a single-mindedness, even from the early days. You couldn't articulate it. You said you didn't quite have your voice yet and know what stories you want to tell, but you had that instinct internally to just keep at it in some capacity. And I think over time, it sounds like you developed your voice and what you wanted to say over those years that led up to you getting an agent and then eventually getting on House of the Dragon and other projects. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think writing that novel and being a bad storyteller, but having a story in me was the beginning, because writing is rewriting, and writing meaning storytelling. It's such a craft, at least for most of us. It is something that you have to continue doing. You have to practice like a violinist. You have to keep practicing. And so we did the documentary, and I felt my voice. And it wasn't honed yet, but I felt it. And then after we did that, I came back to LA and I wrote 2 films in a row within a couple months. And I felt, and that was, I wrote them for me. One is totally foreign language in Gujarati, which is a local language where I'm from in India. The other one was absolutely bonkers. It's a made up world. And I just did it for me because I wanted to feel my voice. I needed to know who I was. And after I wrote those two, as I wrote those two, I was living with my brother, who's a comedian. He's in the show Animal Control right now, and he is my best friend. And he took me in because I had PTSD from the war, and he just, found an apartment for the two of us in LA. And as we were living together, we both come from this clan, the Patels. Patels marry Patels. Mm-hmm. And at the time in the United States, they'd have Patel conventions where we would go to find each other and marry each other. And my brother is dying laughing over this and making all these sardonic jokes over it, whereas I'm in therapy. So as we lived together, Ravi finally said, hey, why don't we make a documentary about this? This is hilarious. Let's make it funny. And so we got funded by PBS, and another 6-7 years went by where I documented, Ravi was in front of the camera and behind the camera, and I was behind, and we watched Ravi go through this hilarious story where he had a non-Indian, a white girlfriend my parents knew nothing about. And they broke up, and he let my parents set him up in the Indian system. And we modeled it after Annie Hall and the great rom-coms of our day. And it was the greatest experience of my career, still is, because I worked with my family, but also, again, found my voice. I was so comfortable working with an actor like my brother, a comedian like my brother, and it just solidified that I wanted to work with those kinds of artists. And I, had no money again at the end. I actually sold my car to finish post. And at that point, we finally got an agent from Meet the Patels. And I was about 35. And we walked into the agency, and they said, okay, Fox Searchlight wants to buy the rights to your film. They want to adapt it into a movie. This is great. We'll help you sell it. And then we'll make more documentaries. And it was the documentary, it was the international sales division. And I just, at that point, I had found my voice, and I just said, I want to direct on Game of Thrones. And they just, literally, and I would too. Honestly, I would too. I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, if I was in the room, I would also start laughing and be like, you are crazy. And so it makes sense. But I don't know what to say. Like, I'm my father's daughter. Like, we are delusional, and we think we can do anything. And so, at that point, I just said it, and they just kind of giggled. And then, but once I said it, that was it. And so for the next years, it was just, okay, I have to qualify. I have to get to Game of Thrones.
That's incredible. It's really the best example of speaking into existence that which you want to be. My father always used to say to me in high school, never be afraid to tell anyone what your goals are, because you never know who can help you. And I think it's a twist on what a lot of us talk about these days about manifesting our dreams, right? Yeah. A lot of people say, just speak it into existence. What my dad said is speak it and look for the people who can help you. So it sounds like you were doing that. So you find yourself working on House of the Dragons, and obviously Game of Thrones has such a passionate and outspoken fan base. And I want to ask you, as someone with a voice, with a vision, how do you think about that fan base when you are making creative decisions? Do you think about making a storyline decision or a directorial decision that will perhaps please the fans, or do you try to tune out the noise?
I actually never think about it. I'm so busy just doing the job. I think for me, the reason I wanted to work on Game of Thrones was because it was, to me, the Olympics of directing. It felt like you were working with these high level actors, you're working with high level writing, high level production, and you're literally in this rigorous schedule that is just unbelievable. And I wanted that. I wanted to that test. So for me, it's just head down, doing a good job, telling a story, making sure that there's emotion in it, asking questions, trying to make things stronger, pushing, pushing, pushing. That's a big thing of it. Is I push really hard to make sure the actors have given everything they can give, the writers have given everything they can give, I've given everything I can give. Just trying to make sure that we're telling a beautiful, beautiful story and taking advantage of everything that we have, whether it be financial or even talent wise. So that's what it was for me after all those years of getting there. I've just enjoyed doing my part.
And your part also involves being a co-executive producer. And I'm wondering, Geeta, how do you think about directing versus producing? Is it two different sides of your brain? And do you find yourself approaching the work differently, or is it all kind of one and the same?
For House of the Dragon, they gave Claire Kilner and me co-executive producer credits purely as I think it was very awesome of them. It was a level of respect because Claire and I had done first season and we both were the two directors who came back second season. So it was more of a name, to be honest. Nothing really changed in our behavior or our jobs, at least for me. With Under the Bridge, the other show that I did recently, I was the pilot director for that and I was executive producer on that. That was where executive producing really came into play. So that's where I think I took a larger role in the show, and I can go into it if you'd like. But yeah, so it was different there. That was a hired executive producer job.
I see. Well, thinking about you talked about wanting to work on a Game of Thrones property because it's the Olympics of filmmaking, so to speak, and you mentioned the cast, and I'm curious, what are the tricks you use as a director to get the best work out of the actors that you're working with? I read one story where you had kind of instigated a fight before a scene began to get some real emotion out of them. Is that a common tactic you use, or how else do you bring the best to the screen?
When I was working with my brother on Meet the Patels, one of the things that I discovered with my brother was the beauty of improvisation. And I think that not everyone is comfortable with improvisation, directors and actors, probably myself before then. And once my brother is an improviser because he is a comedian at heart. Like if he's not coming from within himself, instead of he's an inside out person, and most comedians are, and most actors are. So when we practiced that, I came out of Meet the Patels feeling incredibly comfortable, but also understanding what you can get out of improvisation. You just go 5 rungs higher than just saying these are the words on the script. Improvisation to me is it's not making up new words per se. It's actually feeling from the inside out rather than projecting what people want from you. And so as I went on to different projects after that, I worked with more comedians. And again, each comedian, I could tell, oh, okay, this person, if they could just loosen up and actually feel this from the inside, we're going to get a better performance out of them. So a lot of times, and then I took that all the way to House of the Dragon, all the way to Under the Bridge, where at some points, like I was working on shows where there was a kitchen scene on one of the shows I was working on, and it was just so stiff. Everyone was just saying the words they were supposed to say. I don't know why it felt so shit. I don't know why it felt like that. But what I asked everyone to do is I said, okay, guys, throw away the words just for a moment as an exercise, and you guys are all cutting things and doing things at this one table. Only come here if you have to talk, and say it however you want to say it. Whatever your point is, just say it in your own words. And so we called action. We had the cameras on, and next thing you know, they're buzzing around the kitchen. They're finding their characters. And then they come back with their words. And it's just so natural. And it's so Woody Allen and beautiful and Altman. And so then we put the words back in them. and they did it again, and the cinematographer and I are scrambling as usual, because that's the thing, if you're going to do stuff like this, it's going to be a little crazy, a little chaotic, but we did it and it was beautiful. And that is what I do on every show now. If I feel something is stiff, we just do an exercise like that. Or with the two men in House of the Dragon, they had a kind of a eye for an eye situation. These two families had been fighting for many, many generations, but we don't get to see that. And also, after they speak, we don't get to see the war between the two of them. So all we have, we don't have a history, we don't have the future, we just have the present. And these two characters, we've never seen them before. Literally, they're in one scene. So that's a tall order, because you have to make people feel something, because this scene is actually the inciting incident for the rest of the episode. All the action comes from these two strangers. So what we did is these two actors came in the room, and instead of talking about the script for a minute, I just said, think that this guy across from you just killed the most important person in your life. Who is the most important person in your life? You don't tell me, just think it. And then we did it with the other gentleman. This person, whoever's the most important person in your life, just killed him or her, and killed them now, raped them, stabbed them, slaughtered them. And in that moment, that was it. Go. And it was palpable, for me at least. And then when we shot the scene later after that rehearsal, it was pretty much that. And it's just such a thrill. I mean, this is why I love to do what I'm doing. I think it's like being privy to the beauty of these talented people. I wish I could do what they do, but I can't.
But you can do something else. And what's so interesting to me is, I was going to ask, because you've worked across genre, you've worked in comedy and you've worked in drama, and if your approach is different depending on genre, but it sounds like you take aspects of both and just bring it to every project that you're working on.
Yes, I think one of the things that has been really fun for me is genre. A lot of times, whether it be comedy as a genre or fantasy as a genre, sometimes it's easy to lose heart, like lose the actual heart in it. The comedy can get too hard, and the fantasy can get too intangible. And so what I feel like my contribution tends to be more is bringing heart and grounding things, regardless of whether you're on a dragon, you've got laser, Marvel powers, or you've got this slapstick comedy. It's actually finding, okay, that is hilarious, but let's take it down a minute. What if this actually happened to you right now? And then there's this different, but it's still grounded. It's just a different tone. And so that's what I love to experiment with the most, is making it something that is visceral to all of us watching. So we're not watching it, we're feeling it.
Mm. Now, you mentioned that conflict between the two men was an inciting incident for so much that followed in the rest of the episode. And I wanted to ask you, because specifically in episode 3 of season 2 of House of the Dragon, that set up so much for what came next. How do you think about directing an episode like that, where it's effectively the setup for many episodes that follow?
It's tricky, because a lot of times when I've gotten setup episodes, they can easily feel like this happens, and there's less of a build in which, like, compared to other episodes, because it's setting up literally what's going to happen the next episode. And this has happened so many times. And so what I try to do is, and it's TV, that's the way we work, I try to take the episode and break it into 3 acts. So really challenge myself and my team to treat it as a standalone film. And we have to figure out where there's the inciting incident within it. Okay, now where is the midpoint where certain things have to happen there? Okay, now where is the end of the second act where all is lost? There's got to be something. Like, let's shape it so that we do feel that. And it's always little things. And we work very closely with the writers and the showrunner, because they actually have already thought about all this. It's just about myself and my team making it visual, so we can remind the audience that that's how this is structured. Because obviously these are incredible writers writing these episodes, and they take so long to do them. It's not like they just slap all this stuff down, but I think we can actually do a disservice as the visual artists in flattening it. But if we know where those cadences are, then that's what we should be doing.
Now, I mentioned I'm the editor of Forbes Women. I know that film and screen have not always been the kindest to women, but House of the Dragon centers around two very strong female characters. What has it been like to tell their stories and to interact with these characters as a director?
It's been really wonderful to work with these strong female characters. Most times I can relate to them in moments of, for example, leadership versus family. And sometimes it's a moment of coming across a certain way because you're a woman. You can't be vulnerable when you're a leader. There's a lot of things that are in our head that are not real, I think, when we're new to a leadership space. And then there's the final thing, is just like, forget it, man. I'm a person. Let's just do this. I'm going to wear whatever I want to wear. I'm going to talk however I want to talk, and I'm going to have a heart. So I think there's a beautiful dance that the female characters do in House of the Dragon that is incredibly relatable. We see it in politics as females have fought to have a space there. And sometimes it's interesting because you're like, it shouldn't matter whether this person is a female or not. And other times you're like, dude, it is what it is. Let's just call it. Let's just call what's happening here. So I find it incredibly interesting, and I think all of the credit goes to the writers of the show and Ryan Condal.
I'm glad you mentioned him. As a director, what is that director-showrunner relationship like, and how do you build a successful and effective director-showrunner relationship?
When I made my 2 films, I was the leader, the visionary of those films, or myself and my directing partner. When I transitioned to television, everything shifted. So I am not the head of this. I am not the visionary of any of these shows. I work for the showrunner. And that is a huge understanding that needs to be clear, because otherwise things don't work the way they need to work, the pyramid of leadership. So in television on House of the Dragon, Ryan Condal is the visionary. He leads a team of writers, and they're all on set when we're shooting. And it's their vision that we are delivering. That being said, Ryan particularly is incredibly collaborative, and this will change from show to show. He is masterful at allowing and inspiring the directors to come up with ideas or take this and run. If there's things that are not on the page that are more visual, he really lets us try things. There's so many times in season 1 and season 2 where I'll just have this feeling, or an actor will have a feeling like, hey, I know this is the way we're supposed to do this, but what if we did it this way? We still will make the day, we'll still come out ahead, but can we try this? And I've never heard him say no. He always says, okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, let's try it. Let's try it both ways. And I think that's a really wonderful thing, because we all have departments that we're leading. And I think that's what really makes it such a joy to work in any field, not just film and television. So that's really how the relationship works. Is I'll read the scripts and I'll give reams of notes to Ryan, and he's so smart in that he will read everyone's notes. I'm not the only one. I'm sure the other departments are giving notes, and he takes it all in and makes his decisions because he knows that what he's writing is really strong, and all of us are here to support him and be his soldiers.
That sounds like a healthy relationship, though I wonder, how do you maintain to your voice and vision when working within that structure versus being your own showrunner and director at the same time?
I feel like the last 2 shows, maybe not the ones as much before, where there was much more of strict parameters. These last few shows, particularly Under the Bridge and House of the Dragon, I feel like I very much used my voice. Maybe, I can tell you more specifically. When we get the script, I give my thoughts, and Ryan and I work things out together, and ultimately it's his decision, but I feel like I have a voice, and I give him credit for that. And then when it comes to the visuals, he pretty much allows us to go with it. And it's not just visuals, it's performance, it's character creation. We have a lot of new characters this season. There's one character that, we knew we wanted her to be a certain way. And so I just pitched, I think this would be this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to do about a month and a half of work where we would find her character together, she and I in a room, and we'll improvise her whole history. And so we did that. And then Ryan, I came up to Ryan and said, okay, this is what we came up with. I think this would be great. And he was like, cool. Yeah, that sounds good to me too. And I think that allowed me to also, be a filmmaker in places on the show. And I really appreciate it, because it's not about my ego. It's more about the craft. I really give everything I do, everything I have. And now, as I get to the end of the second season, I do feel like it's time to do films and take the next step. I think that's definitely an exciting thing that I've been hiding behind. Again, I've been hiding behind TV for a while, and now it's time to take that next step. I think doing Under the Bridge was another place in which I had a certain vision for the show, and the showrunners had a certain vision, and we worked together. And here we're all convincing each other, this is what I think we need to do, this is what I think we need to do. And so I feel my voice in that. I am a collaborator with them and saying, look, I think we need to push the thriller further. Let's go Silence of a Lamb. Let's darken the set. There's certain things that I feel very strongly about, and I feel very heard and collaborated with by my partners in both those shows. And also, when you do a pilot like Under the Bridge, where I was the pilot director, I have a strong voice in the casting along with the studio and the showrunners. And same thing with Under the Bridge, we had a very young cast. So I don't know if you're familiar, but Under the Bridge is about a 14-year-old girl, a true story. She was killed and found dead under a bridge. And it turns out that it was these girls who bullied her. And so I directed the pilot for that and was the lead director. And for that, there were 4 girls who didn't have the experience yet of the grounded kind of 8-mile feeling that you need for a show like that. And so I went to the studio and I said, look, this isn't going to work. This cannot be presentational. We need to give these young actors we have to set them up for success. And so I said, can I please workshop with them for about a month and a half, where we literally improvise all their backgrounds. I think most of them had not experienced any of the devastating stuff that their characters had experienced, because their characters were from really bad parts of town. And so they said yes, and the showrunner said yes. And so I took these 4 talented actors and we just rehearsed like you would a play and found their characters. I'm like, here, at one point, 3 characters were bullying the main actor who had never been bullied before. And she was down to her knees, but she needed to feel that. And so that's me being a filmmaker. That's me having a voice. And that's them being so talented that they did this for a month and a half. They went to screen and just did such a brilliant job. And those are the things, right? That's where I feel very lucky to have the showrunners and the studios who allow us to really go after the art. I did not have that as much when I first started out, because there were different shows that had different goals, and that was right for those shows.
I could listen to you talk about storytelling all day. I think you have found the perfect career for you, because you're so good at even telling these stories. I'm just entranced. But I do have 2 final questions before we let you go. I know you have an 8-week-old at home, and I feel bad keeping you this long. But we did talk about the season 2 finale of House of the Dragon coming up. And without getting in trouble with HBO, is there anything you can tell us and our viewers about what to expect from the finale?
Oh gosh, nobody wants to get in trouble with HBO. I don't know what I'm allowed to say. I didn't even talk to them about this. I don't know. I will say that everything that was set up in episode 3, particularly, which is the one I directed, that wasn't it. It wasn't a coincidence that I directed episode 3. There's a lot of things in episode 3 that are bookended in the season finale that come full circle. So that's a pretty exciting thing, that while we were shooting, it did feel like a film shoot, in that I knew the beginning and I knew the end, but I also was lucky enough to be able to direct those 2 pieces.
I like that. I like that tease. And then my final question, hopefully, broad question, but you talked about finding your voice. You talked about kind of recognizing when you were hiding behind other people or the institution of television. And I want to ask, what is your advice for aspiring filmmakers, and especially aspiring filmmakers who might be women of color who are looking to break in and follow in your footsteps?
My advice in general would be follow your bliss. I think there are certain points where it's so much easier to project on yourself what you think people want, whether it be English language, whether it be a vampire. I remember I had a writer's assistant for myself who thought she had to write a vampire movie because everybody was writing vampire movies, and there's no way I'm going to get a job unless I do. I think follow your bliss, go from the inside. If you have a story, what is your story to tell? And if you don't have a story to tell, go live in the world. Find the stories, find the things that you want to say, because ultimately I think one of the problems that I see as I'm reading and looking around is people don't have something to say, and so there's no heart in so many projects that don't make it to the screen. You'll never see them, but I do. So I think that's one thing, and I'm really glad I followed my bliss and was allowed to. The other thing is, there's three things probably. The other thing is, there was a point in my career after I finished Meet the Patels where I was broke again, and I was about 35. I had not gotten the agents yet because nobody actually wanted Meet the Patels when it first came out. It became a hit later through the underground small festivals. So at first we actually didn't get into any of the big festivals, Sundance, Tribeca, whatever. And I thought, okay, I'm done. I'm washed up. Like, I have got to go get a real job. I have got to start dating. Like, there's things that I have to do at this point. I had given so much up to do this, art. And I went on a walk and I thought to myself, okay, I have no money. I go out with my friends and we split the bill. I asked to split the bill, but everybody else just, what I'm saying? I have no money. So I'll be like, I had a lemonade. You guys split it. I just had no money. I was that person. And everyone knows that story in their life where everyone has more money than you. Everyone had big houses, big careers. They had 401ks, they had insurance, and I had nothing. And I thought, if I leave right now and get a real job, I can have all that. Or I can stay and continue for the rest of my life to do what I love and make no money and be a secretary on the side, but I will be happy. And in that moment, I made a decision that I would choose to be happy and live on beans. And I never would expect to make money doing it. I would just make my little films, and this is the way I'd live. And that was the greatest decision I ever made, because yes, of course, now I have a big career, but I never expected it. And to this day, I am no different than I was in that moment. I am the same level of happy that I was in that moment. And I wish that for everyone, that if you love something, just do it, because that's success. Success isn't having money. And the third thing is, for women, I will not lie. There were times where right from the beginning, it was tough. I didn't feel accepted when I first started directing. I don't know if it was because I was a woman. I don't know if it was because of something else, but I literally had people testing me. I had in my second show, the DP was asking me if I knew terminology of lenses in film, which nobody needs to know to be a director, but he did it in front of the crew. I had actors refuse to talk to me. I'm telling you the bad stuff. There were great things too, but it was just tough. And I wished that I had believed in myself more and understood that it wasn't my fault. I had another director tell me the reason I got a job is because of the quota. And yes, maybe, but there are so many things along the way, because there is this incentive to hire women. I think sometimes it can feel like people think that you're only hired because they needed a woman. In fact, I interviewed for a show and they literally said to me, we need a diverse female, so we thought we'd talk to you. Like, it's not like you're making it up in your head. And I think my advice would be, and I say this to myself constantly, is you are talented. You wouldn't be here if you weren't talented. And you are going to do a great job, and you will keep going and do not listen to any of this because it's not productive. Just keep going. And what's interesting is now I'm almost 50, and so many people from the past who took me down, and I did go down for a couple weeks, you know, where you feel like crap, have come and apologized and said, hey, I just want you to know we really gave you a hard time. And I'm like, oh my God, so it wasn't in my head, you know, stuff like that. And so I remember that now. And for my daughter one day, I just want to tell her, like, just keep going, you know, regardless, whether it's because you're short, you talk funny, I don't care. Just keep going, you know, just know that you are talented.
Keep going. What good advice. Geeta Patel, thank you so much for joining us. I really could talk to you all day, but I'm going to let you get back to your 8-week-old and thinking about your next step. And please come and talk to us when you have your next project. I really want to follow everything that you do, and I think our audience does too. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.